Dear President of the Croatian Parliament, dear President of the European Affairs Committee of the Croatian Parliament, dear representatives of national parliaments of the member states, representatives of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Vice President of the Commission, I'm really pleased to welcome you here at the National University Library in Zagreb, which is the main venue of all the events of the Croatian presidency, which will be taking place in Croatia, but not only as a Croatian Prime Minister, but also as a former member of the Croatian Parliament, former member of the European Parliament, and someone who is fully aware of the importance that COSAC and its activities over the past 30 years have contributed to the various EU policies, I would say, very thorough examination of the principles of proportionality, subsidiarity, which were the main elements of the check and the input that comes to the European level from the level of the national parliaments. The Croatian presidency for us indeed is a historic moment. It comes 28 years after international recognition of Croatia, 25 years after the liberation of the occupied territories of our country, and 22 years after the peaceful reintegration of the Croatian Danubian area into our legal and constitutional order. After the war, Croatia undertook thorough reforms during its accession process, rebuilt its economy, and we finally joined, as you know, the European Union in 2013. For Croatia, the European Union is both an unprecedented peace project and a union that draws strength from common values and solidarity. It is the world's largest trade bloc and a leading international actor. Now, 7 years into membership, we are really pleased to be at the helm of the presidency of the Council and provide our own contribution and impulse at the outset of the new institutional and the legislative cycle of the Union. During the last 2 weeks, Croatia had the opportunity to present our priorities at the European level and also at the levels of the College of the European Commission, where exactly in this room we had a meeting now 10 days ago, and I think it was a very fruitful exchange of views, understanding the operational priorities of the Commission of Ursula von der Leyen. We also hosted the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and I have personally seen both leaders of France and Germany in the last 2 weeks in order to see a wider context of the activities where we can be supportive and initiate activities that may go through in the following 6 months. Our vision of priorities, as you are probably acquainted, encompasses 4 pillars, which show how Croatian citizens see the benefits of the Union. And they are all enshrined in the motto of our presidency, which is a strong Europe in the world of challenges. These pillars are Europe that develops, Europe that connects, Europe that protects, and an influential Europe. In parallel, there are 4 overarching priorities we will deal with during our presidency. And these are certainly the multi-annual financial framework, the enlargement dossier, which we want to put on the table of the EU institutions, the Conference on the Future of Europe, and our new relations with the United Kingdom. Regarding the first pillar, which is Europe that develops, our priority is to ensure a balanced and sustainable and inclusive development of the Union, which takes into account the specificities and the needs of all member states and their regions. This requires further development of policies that create better working and living conditions for all, especially for the young, and to address the pressing issue of demographic challenges with which half of the Union is faced. We will also advocate for a strong single market, for raising the competitiveness of the European Union through cohesion and convergence, enhancing digitalization, investment and innovation, and research and developing skills for the future jobs. It is important to foster sustainable growth and tackle the ever-pressing issue of climate change by taking first steps in developing the European Green Deal. We will accompany, at the level of the Council, a series of proposals which will be put forward by the Commission in the months to come. I think that together we need to work to achieve European Union climate neutrality by 2050, though taking into account the different backgrounds of our industries and different level of development of each member state. Regarding the second pillar, a Europe that connects, the growth and development of the Union depends largely on the networking of its economy and full exploitation of its infrastructural and human resources. Connectivity is one of the most important prerequisites for achieving social, economic and territorial cohesion among member states. To this end, we will promote initiatives contributing to transport, energy and digital connectivity to achieve further social and economic cohesion. We will also strive to promote other initiatives contributing to stronger connections between Union citizens through sport, culture, education, and the entire concept of what we all call people-to-people contacts. As far as the third pillar is concerned, a Europe that protects, only a safe Europe can provide peaceful environment for its citizens. This means strengthening security internally and externally against all threats, as well as the efficient protection of the European Union's external borders. We will work on solutions for a sustainable and effective migration and asylum policies, as well as on the Union's new strategic guidelines in the areas of freedom, security and justice, based on the shared values, democracy and the rule of law. Protecting our fundamental values and principles is vital for the Union. Therefore, we will pursue a comprehensive approach to the protection and promotion of the rule of law, but also engage in the prevention of dissemination of fake news, intolerance and disinformation on digital platforms. A Europe that protects also refers to improved protection of economic, social and cultural rights, together with better environmental and consumer protection standards. As far as the fourth pillar, an influential Europe is concerned, we believe that no single member state is able to address international challenges on its own. So we have to reinforce our unity, which is, in our view, our biggest strength. To confirm our global role in today's multipolar world, Europe should speak with one voice, more often and more loudly. This also requires further development of capabilities and instruments for joint action, including our defense in complementarity with NATO. Only by strengthening the Union's instruments for dealing efficiently with global issues shall we be able to support our ambition as a global actor to build a more influential Europe. It also involves advocating for a Europe that has a leading role both globally and in its neighborhood, in strengthening multilateralism, promotion of European values, and the fulfillment of United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our credibility in international relations requires, above all, a responsible and geopolitical approach towards our own neighborhood. On that note, we will host the European Union Western Balkan Summit in Zagreb in May, which I will address later under the topic of enlargement. Being fully aware of the positive transforming power of the accession process, we will continue to support actively the EU enlargement based on the fulfillment of all the membership criteria. In close cooperation with the President of the European Council, we agreed to organize an Eastern Partnership Summit in Brussels in June, which is a signal to our neighbors in that part of Europe. As far as the other main and most, I would say, politically and mediatically attractive points, I would like to mention a few perspectives from Croatia. We need to build on the results of the Finnish presidency and undertake necessary efforts as far as the multi-annual financial framework is concerned. You are aware that the European Council in December mandated the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, to take forward the negotiations regarding the negotiating box, which we feel is good and positive because in this last year of the really complex negotiations, we need to have someone as neutral as possible to handle the final compromise. We will, as presidency, not only support him at the highest political level, but we shall do a maximum support at the level of the General Affairs Council, as we have done so far, as well as on the COREPER level, and also in the context of our relations with the European Parliament, because we need to get through, as you are aware, around 43 pieces of legislation, which actually makes the entire bulk of the multi-annual financial framework. We would like to have these negotiations finished on time, if possible during the Croatian presidency, because that would enable us all to start on time with the new operational programs. The experience tells us that whenever there is delay in the adoption of the MFF, we then suffer during the first years of the financial perspective when it comes to the national envelopes and the implementation. We feel that the next 7-year budget must retain its development-oriented and socially sensitive character. This will be best achieved not only through the financing of treaty-based policies, which we call traditional policies, such as cohesion and agriculture, but also through ensuring resources for addressing the new challenges, especially climate, migration, digitalization, innovation, and other issues which are on the agenda and the horizon of the European Union. Therefore, the budget has to accompany the ambitions we put into the EU strategic agenda, which the Council adopted in June, as well as the program of the Commission, which was presented to the European Parliament. The completion of orderly withdrawal of United Kingdom and future relations. This is certainly an item that has been with the EU institutions almost like a saga for the last 3.5 years. We feel that the conditions are ripe to conclude, both technically and legally, everything that needs to be done by the 31st of January, whether it is at the level of the Council or the consent of the European Parliament, so that we have attained the first objective, and that was the orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the Union. What we shall be working on, and we are already fully engaged, together with the Commission and other members of the Council, is the adoption of the negotiating framework for the future relations. You are aware that the transition period provides only 11 months for us and the UK to conclude the new contractual relations. It seems for the moment that the UK government doesn't seem to be willing to request a prolongation, which is due to be submitted, if there is one, by the end of June. If there is no such a request, then we need to negotiate a sensible and reasonable first contractual relation after the divorce. On the enlargement, you know that this is an item which certainly doesn't have as enthusiastic reception at the level of the member states, publics or political parties, as it used to have in the 90s or the first half of the previous decade. But what we have is a responsibility. And this responsibility for us, especially as the only country who, from the Zagreb summit in 2000, which was the first summit that paved the way in the European perspective for the countries of Southeast Europe, managed to move from one side of the table to the other. Croatia is the only success story in terms of Southeast European countries in 20 years. And from that point of view, we would like to put this item on the agenda. Therefore, in this room, we will have this summit in May. The idea is to structure the regular meetings in the future, at least every 2 years, because this has been something that was literally lacking. You will recall, those of you who are following a little bit closer, the relations between the EU and the Western Balkan countries. There was a summit in Zagreb in 2000, then one in Thessaloniki in 2003. Then we had a void of 15 years until Sofia 2018, and there wasn't ever a full format meeting between the heads of state and government of the EU and the countries of the region. Luckily, the German Chancellor Merkel initiated in 2014 an exercise called Berlin Process, which substituted partially this lack of dialogue, but it was more focused on projects, on connectivity, on infrastructure, on support for the development, rather than a systematic, institutional, contractual, and politically framed comprehensive dialogue. So we want a political summit which will really dive into the substance of the dossiers in the region, and very realistically, without any politically speaking naivete, look at what we can do with each other in the decade that is about to start. A special attention will be dedicated to the unblocking of the situation which we unfortunately had with North Macedonia and Albania at the level of the European Council in October. My sentiment is that with the approach of the new Commission, and especially the work of the Enlargement Commissioner Varhelyi, if there is going to be a progress on the methodology of the accession negotiations, then we might expect a more forthcoming reception of that altered methodology of the accession procedure by one member state. And if there is a critical progress in these months on the side of Albania and Northern Macedonia, then we shall all work towards the deblocking of the decision regarding the opening of the IGCs, which are the intergovernmental conferences for the two countries, because we feel this is the moment to send a constructive and the strategic message to the region, and this would be certainly a step we would very much appreciate. This doesn't mean that we would neglect other countries, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, because they also have their due place in Europe, and we need to support their constructive reform efforts. The final item, which is politically very important, and this is where I imagine there will be a lot of input coming from the national parliaments, is the Conference on the Future of Europe. I understand that both Vice President of the European Parliament and Vice President of the European Commission, Madam McGuinness and Madam Šuica, will have a special panel on this. I think we need to use this inclusive process in the next 2.5 years, really to put on table all the issues we feel are either misunderstood or neglected, or should be more emphasized in the way that Europe is working today and the way that Europe is perceived today. Because I have said it also many times in the Croatian parliament, a certain amount of our citizens across Europe feels disconnected, feels excluded, feels discontent, and they articulate discontent in different manners. Some during the elections by supporting the protest political parties or protest groups that eventually evolve to the political parties, or articulate their dissatisfaction in other manners by demonstrations or all sorts of protests that we have faced across the European continent. I don't think we should use the Conference on the Future of Europe to substitute the debate that goes normally within the institutions. It has to be a substantive debate that will leave open the finalité of its conclusions, because we can't really be sure what will be the outcome in 2 years, 2.5 years from today. And therefore, Croatia would like to provide its own contribution also by addressing the so-called elephant in the room, which is the misunderstanding among the major political groups in Europe on what does the Spitzencandidate concept mean. Because we can't walk into the 2024 European Parliament elections the way that we have walked into the 2019 European Parliament elections, creating entirely opposing expectations by different political groups and also perceptions of the different institutions. How should really be taken into account the result of the European Parliament elections. So these are the items which I felt are important at the beginning of our dialogue to be put forward. I really look forward for your questions, and I'm happy to answer any of your concerns. Thank you very much.